Okay. Welcome back to the 24-hour telethon known as Conduct Detrimental NFL Style. We've been covering Deshaun Watson, special episode following the settlement of his lawsuits. We did a first ever live Conduct
Cast
podcast live for 3.5 hours. And now we're back today with sort of a wrap up of today's congressional hearing. And we're honored to have back with us today a one-time guest of Conduct Detrimental, an instrumental figure in the Washington football sort of saga, Megan Imbert. Megan, welcome back to Conduct Detrimental. For the benefit of our audience, can you give us a little bit of a background as to who you are and where you kind of fit into the puzzle?
Happy to. Thank you again for having me. So my story was, I was originally an intern with the team in 2006 to 2007 in public relations, and then the television department working under Larry Michael. And then I was hired full-time in 2008, and I left on my own accord in 2011 during the lockout. So my role in this whole 2 years was, when I first saw the original article in July of 2020 with Emily Applegate, I was then inspired to come forward, originally anonymously, about my experiences. And it was shortly thereafter, that first article, that I learned of the explicit videos that my television department under Larry Michael produced for owner Dan Snyder. And once I learned that, I said, put my name on this. And I've been on record ever since. I am disgusted, I'm angry. And ever since then, helped out with the Wilkinson investigation, Congress, you name it. However I can get more voices, adding their experiences.
So you spoke with Beth Wilkinson in connection with her review and investigation of the Washington Commanders' workplace. So
yes, I was a participant.
Are you less disgusted or more disgusted after today's congressional hearing and testimony / inquisition of NFL Commissioner Roger Goodell?
I'm not surprised by Roger Goodell's testimony today. I expected some of his answers. I have my own set of questions that I wish that they would have addressed.
Like what?
One of the ones that originally created the mistrust that I have with the NFL was, why did they allow the Snyders to get 100% ownership of this team while there was an investigation going on about Dan Snyder? That's question number one to me. Also, is extremely disheartening today to hear repeatedly Roger Goodell state that he thinks Dan Snyder has been held accountable. If that's the case, then why does he have Mary Jo White also doing an investigation? So I think there was a bit of hypocrisy. We noticed, I love the slide that came up on the 243-page Deflategate report, the testimony around Miami Dolphins and how they redacted names. So I think there were a few roadblocks for Roger Goodell today that happened. Yeah, similarly, I didn't feel like anyone straight up asked him, what were the findings? You know, like, I think there were some basic questions that were forgotten.
So I have a quick one. I mean, and you hit on it. It's, you know, it's almost like Goodell wants to have his cake and eat it too, right? He's like, we found them responsible. We're holding them accountable. And then the question was asked a couple of times. I would have liked a few more follow-ups, at least from the politicians that were on the ball, not the ones that were filibustering and bringing up nonsense that had nothing to do with anything. But the point is, if you really have found them responsible and they've been held accountable, why are you continuing to investigate them, right? So I guess there's some things that you don't feel that they've been held accountable for, right? The NFL is certainly a part of this investigation. And I think the other part, Megan, that I want to get your thoughts on, you know, Roger Goodell was pretty complimentary of Beth Wilkinson, and, you know, for better or for worse, I think initially the read on the situation was that Wilkinson didn't want to issue a written report. And I think now in hindsight, we've realized that was a decision that was made above her to not have a written report. Now, no one asked this question. And I honestly, I'm half joking, but if you put people like Dan and I on the, you know, on the question panel, like, you know, I think we would have asked this. I think it would have been right at the tip of my tongue. Like, if Beth Wilkinson did such a good job, right, and she made the recommendation that Dan Snyder would get in more trouble than he did, why did we switch to, you know, Mary Jo White in the middle of all this?
That's one of my questions, Dan.
Right? Like, why would if she did such a good job, she's great, right? And she did all this work up on the case for like a year. what was the benefit of switching to someone else? Unless you wanted a fresh start, you wanted another bite at the apple.
My original, I remember, I think I talked to Fox 5 about this, was my thinking is that they didn't want she wouldn't whitewash the findings. She likely had solid recommendations. We know that Dave Donovan sued her to try to find out about that 2009 misconduct. We know that she knows all the players. If she really interviewed over 150 people, then she from the common interest agreement, and when Congress found all that out, it looks like Roger Goodell or the league office were the ones that no longer requested an actual written report. So to me, right there, that's on Roger Goodell. That's on his office. Where's Lisa Friel, right? Where there were no questions about the investigators from the league office. I would have loved to see more around that as well. Because after Lisa Friel talked about how the findings were not on par with what they would consider an owner to be, all of a sudden she's gone radio silent.
Let's talk about Dave Donovan for a second, because these were the findings that came out yesterday, right? That with respect to this 2009 allegation, that Dave Donovan, who at the time was one of the lawyers for the team, he conducted an internal investigation when, according to protocol back in 2009, that should have been handled by the league. So, it didn't come up today at all. Maybe a little bit of whether or not, Roger Goodell knew ahead of time. But I think that incident just speaks to this point of like institutional control, right? It seems like Dave Donovan tried to hide this issue from the league back in 2009. Was that your reading of the situation as well?
It's difficult being in my spot, considering I know these people individually, right? I worked alongside them. I had a good
and Larry Michael, who that clip came out with today.
My boss. Yeah. Oh, well, we can talk about that clip separately. That had me just sobbing. I can't really speak to Dave Donovan's motives, but it definitely appears like it would be a conflict of interest, but I'm not a lawyer, so I don't really feel comfortable talking about that particular question. I think that's definitely an area I'd love for them to dig in more, though.
All right, I want to go back to the Beth Wilkinson, recommendation. I mean, it's been rumored for quite a while, and I think a radio station in Washington, D.C. reported that Beth Wilkinson was prepared to recommend that Dan Snyder be forced to sell his interest in the Washington Commanders. I was struck by the fact that nobody on the committee asked Roger Goodell whether Beth Wilkinson was willing or had a particular recommendation. Forget about issuing the report, releasing the report. Did Beth Wilkinson have a recommendation as to the proposed punishment for for Washington Commanders owner Dan Snyder? I think that was laying out there, ready to be sort of slam dunked by somebody. Just like, why didn't they do redactions on the report and then release the redacted report? Why did nobody? I mean, that would have been one of my first questions. Did Beth Wilkinson have any recommendation as to the punishment?
I was actually stunned that question wouldn't have been asked. And then related to that, I would have wanted to know, how often did Roger Goodell or his investigators actually talk to the Commanders, Snyder, Jason Wright, Greg Rush, all those people that are orchestrating the Commanders' response to all of this? And if you notice, the Commanders put out a letter to their employees today on, here are the recommendations that Beth Wilkinson had and what we're doing about it. So they're trying to do their PR move now. But that's one of the basic questions I certainly I thought would have been a softball. And then I'm also curious, and it seemed like from my vantage point, I probably need to listen to Roger again, but he didn't seem very clear or guided on the backdoor common interest agreement. It didn't seem like he really understood that this is so the league and the team could talk. And if you go back to timing, I would be very curious to know at what point that date of that agreement coming into place, when the majority of these 150 people participate in the investigation, because that's the biggest thing for us. We were not informed of it. We were only informed when Congress released information on it, right? So yeah. I think there's a little bit more there too, as well. Yeah. I'm also curious, especially if the NFL is privy to the findings or whatever these updates were. I'm very interested to know if other NFL owners have been privy to those findings, who's had access to the actual information that the Wilkinson firm shared. So I'm curious about those things as well.
Okay, we were watching today the Larry Michaels clip in real time. I don't know which congressman or congresswoman introduced the videotape. Had you ever seen that before? What was your reaction to it?
I'm actually really glad that it wasn't live streamed. I bursted into tears. I actually like sobbed, cried. It wasn't like tears in my eyes. I was that blonde intern in 2006, in 2007. I worked for this man. I've heard comments like that out of his mouth. And it's disappointing because these situations and it's hard for me to say I'm a victim or a survivor of this, but there is real PTSD and there's things that we suppress. And when I watched that clip, I just literally had a visceral reaction that I'm hearing that clip was from like 2019. That's like 13 years removed from when I worked for that guy. And it's really tough.
And nothing's changed. Like over that long time horizon, the behaviors still are the same behaviors.
Larry Michael was rewarded with retirement a few days before the original Washington Post story launched. And I know people are critical of me because there's pictures of me with Larry, even most recently 2015. I didn't know about the videos until 2020. I can assure
just for the benefit of our audience, yeah. What did Larry say on this video? Because not everybody tuned in.
Yeah,
live.
so the audio clip, it was basically when Larry probably thought that either he didn't care or it was a hot mic, basically observing an intern that he thought was pretty and saying suggestions.
I have the exact quote if it helps. It's he goes,
"Don't leave anything out, Dan."
No, I'm not. I have it verbatim. I do think our intern, the blonde in the black, period. I think she's looking freaking pretty good. And Roger Goodell's response to that question was, "This is unacceptable."
Larry said more than that. He had expletives also as another part of that clip, but just completely disrespectful. I think Roger was probably stunned. He probably didn't think that they'd show actual evidence of things like that. But that's the reality of this. And if you keep in mind, we were privy to stuff like that daily, right? So if you were to the magnitude of those types of comments, not just from Larry, right? It's pretty stunning. But yeah, that's where Goodell's backtracking what he's saying. He's saying, well, that's inappropriate. And it's like, what about everything that came forward with the Wilkinson report? You can't, if we were to present everything that we think would be in that report, or if they read the memo, I'm sure the whole time, Roger, his own morality would have been, this is not ethical, this is not okay. That's where I think they're going to have this, he's going to have an internal conflict, I think. Or
here's $1
million salary.
Yeah, he didn't confirm or deny that number. That was fun. There was one portion of the hearing. I know you mentioned, you got upset at the Larry Michael clip, and it was disturbing. We think, at least on our show, we try to go over all the kind of nooks and crannies of this case, and obviously more keeps coming out. That was one thing that I had not seen before. At one point, Roger Goodell said something that I think probably made you feel pretty good. Roger Goodell was asked, "Have you ever seen anything with another NFL organization that compared to what you've uncovered and you've seen with the Washington Commanders?" And I said on our live stream, I'm like, there's no way he's going to answer this question. And to Goodell's credit, he said, "No, I have never seen anything that comes close to what I've seen with the Washington Commanders." So, we predicted ahead of time that Goodell wasn't going to give us much of anything. He wasn't going to throw Snyder under the bus. He wasn't going to throw the Commanders under the bus. But with that one statement, he kind of has, right? He's kind of said that what has gone on at Washington HQ is unprecedented. That's another way to read it. What did you think when you heard those type of comments?
I still think it's hollow words because you still have the Snyders in charge of this organization. Whether they want to put Jason Wright as a figurehead, if they want to hire the most diverse leadership, you still have that person in power that is not being held accountable. Keep in mind that $10 million fine was to the organization, not to Dan Snyder. So he still has not been held accountable. So while yes, this might be unprecedented and unfounded, it's really hollow words because the consequences don't align with what he's saying.
You heard Roger Goodell testify at great length today. Probably the first time any of us has ever observed Commissioner Goodell under something akin to a cross-examination. How did you feel about his performance today? What would you like? How do you assess how he addressed the committee's concerns and or your concerns? What would you like to say to Roger Goodell if you had the opportunity?
Oh, if I had the opportunity to talk to Roger Goodell, I mean, we've written him letters, we've done all of that. My biggest thing was I was 19 years old when I started at the then Washington Redskins organization. He has two twin daughters that I think are 20 now. And my biggest plea to him was, I understand what your job is to protect the owners, but at some point, can you have some level of compassion or empathy to think for a second, what if we were your daughters? What if we were your wife? Like, I really struggle with the sheer lack of empathy and lack of any kind of protection, even to this day, around this shadow investigation, the use of private investigators, all of that. These are things that have happened in the past 2 years. So this is not a changed person. So I really struggle with the commentary around how he thinks Dan Snyder's been held accountable, and also how he acts right now and the conduct policy, and the fact that the conduct policy should be applied to the owners as well. At what point is enough enough? And also, how does this set a precedent for the future?
So here's one question that I'll give my fellow Dan some credit for. He said at the beginning of this hearing, and he said it a couple times, to the extent that there are certain employees that want their names to be confidential, the NFL has been relying on that excuse to say, well, we can't release really anything because certain employees don't want these details to become public. But then there are people like yourself and Anna Nunez, and you can go through the list, a lot of people that are very active and vocal on social media, former colleagues of yours, past and present with Washington, that are very public about their involvement with the organization. So, Megan, I know Dan asked you what you would say to Roger Goodell. I'll give you a similar question. What would you say to Roger Goodell and the NFL and people, with the organization that are hiding behind some people wanting to be, remain confidential while others do not? And Dan raised the point a couple of times, right? Just redact the names of the people that want to be kept private and let people like yourself and Anna Nunez and people that have appeared on our platform that we've engaged with on social media, let their names come out. If they're okay with it, right? Isn't that decision up to you, right? Why is Roger Goodell making that decision for you?
It's not about us. It's never been about us. It's been about protecting him, Dan Snyder, the league. It's protecting the other people that might be implicated. None of this is about me, what I went through. It's not about any of us. And we heard Roger Goodell at that owners meeting talk about protecting us. It's not true. And there's an absolute way of redacting names or even letting us see how the report would be published. Talk to the individuals. Are you comfortable with this? Is this okay? There's a way to have some level of transparency when it comes to releasing the findings. And fundamentally, it's never been about us. It's been Roger Goodell is protecting the shield. He's protecting Dan Snyder. They're protecting each other. And that's all this is. They do not care. They've sent that message loud and clear. We had a congressional hearing today about it. It's not about me at all.
Megan, are there any individuals, alleged victims, who don't want to have their names out there? Just seemingly everybody who's been public on this says release the report.
Well, we had over 150 people participate in the Wilkinson investigation, and only about 5 or 6 of us have been on record publicly. And some folks probably have, in their investigation, they might have shared things that they don't want to be public, right? So there's absolutely people that would not want their name associated. And there's people that I believe have participated with Congress that they want nothing to do with it. They don't want their name out there, but they're going to corroborate or they're going to help how they can. So I think there absolutely needs to be a level of protection. But again, with that common interest agreement, doesn't Dan Snyder already know all the people that participated and everything that they said?
Yeah, redactions would seem to be the mechanism here that would protect The identity, and it's not just redacting the names, redacting then some of the identifying details around those individuals so that we wouldn't be able to guess who that person is. But certainly as to your story and some of the other public facing, victims, you'd certainly want to have your names associated with that report. And you want your narrative, your story, and what happened to you known to the public as part of an investigative report with factual findings. Are you ready to have that happen?
We've been ready for that. I do think though that there's some, and I'm going to make some assumptions about some of the things that may have come through for the report. Chances are serious allegations or those directly involving Dan Snyder, there's probably very few witnesses, just as we saw with Tiffany Johnson's and how Jason Freeman's come forward. So I think depending on what's been reported, it does get very hard when there could be only a few people that actually were witnesses to it. And some of the witnesses in some instances might have been bad actors as well. So it's a very odd situation. But I think Dan Snyder is probably very well aware of who all participated. It's just a matter of whether or not people want those public details out there in the open, because this stuff is embarrassing. There's a lot of guilt and shame, or there's PTSD attached to it. So I think the more this drags on, the harder it just becomes more emotionally damaging, frankly.
So the question I had, you brought up the name, and it came up once during the hearing. That was Jason Friedman. They didn't mention him by name, but one of the politicians at one point mentioned, he was of the opinion that we shouldn't be having the hearing today. It's a waste of time. This is all based on the comments of one disgruntled employee. And Megan, we've been following this closely. The one, quote unquote, one disgruntled employee, that pertains to cooking the books and the ticket revenue nonsense. It's pretty blasphemous to call the allegations, the toxic workplace allegations, the sexual harassment allegations. It's pretty crazy to call that one disgruntled employee. So for those that were coming new to the hearing, like, whatever politician that was, if I knew who it was, I'm not afraid to call him out. But right, like, he just got it completely mixed up, right? I would hope it was a careless mistake, not an intentional one, to make light of the volume of people that have come forward with respect to this particular hearing.
Yeah, I think that goes back to one of my original points on, I think people are forgetting that there's actual lives associated here. And while some people leaving the organization might not have been the happiest, or not realizing some of the abuses that went on, or that they were even a victim of abuse, even if they were subjected to that environment for years. Sometimes people don't know that until they're out of it. So I think there's a little bit of carelessness on how some folks are referencing the actual people that are trying to do the right thing. It's been hard. That's been really hard to watch.
So I have one more, and then I'll kick it back to Dan. Among another topic that came up today that I wasn't aware of, when we saw the actual physical dossier being waved in the air, like, look at this packet. Snyder's got dirt on everybody. He's got dirt on the attorneys and journalists and former employees. We were having, Megan, a conversation offline, and to whatever extent you're comfortable talking about it. Is it your understanding that you are one of the individuals named in that packet?
Based on the 29-page memo, I am. I'm nosy. I'm curious, like, what they found. But again, that's something I'm sure all of us wouldn't want out there publicly. I would love for Congress to share privately with me whatever they pulled together. It's pretty wild to me that they went to those lengths of trying to figure out how to either pull negative information or whatever could discredit our valid
I just wonder how they got it, right? Isn't that Snyder's dirt sheet? Like, how did Snyder disclose that to Congress? Like, that was my read on the situation.
I thought I saw in the memo, and I don't want to be misquoted, but I thought I saw that it was provided over by his attorneys, but I find that to be pretty shocking. But I don't know factually, but that's what it looked like from the memo. Is that what you read as well?
That's my understanding. It just seems, Snyder is the guy that's not appearing, right? He has to get subpoenaed from France. Of the 400,000 some odd documents they provided, the John Gruden emails were not included. So of all things to be compliant on, providing the dirt sheet was not something that I would guess would be at the top of the list.
So an interesting theory here could have been, I probably shouldn't even bring this up, but he could have, their attorneys could have provided that to some of those GOP committee members that then shared it with the other committee members. I don't know if that happened, but that easily could have happened because they could have used any of that in their commentary to try to discredit us during the hearing. That would have been the only other thing, but that's a pretty risky thing, and obviously it got in the hands of Chairwoman Maloney. So, but I hate the fact that those are the level of tactics. You're coming after these people that are brave and trying to actually do the genuine right thing, and he's obviously pulling out all the stops to try to prevent more people from coming forward.
Megan, you're named in this sort of dossier in several places, and you were sort of part of, ensnared in the shadow investigation that Snyder commissioned for some private investigators to conduct. Were you aware of the level of the surveillance? Did any of this come as a surprise to you, or, in terms of how recent it was?
When I woke up this morning and I saw the Washington Post article, the entire trajectory of my day changed. It was like, I felt sick, I felt nauseated. It feels like a breach of privacy on top of, like, how much more do we have to deal with here? And is this just the beginning? I look at it as a sign of a weak and pathetic man that is scared. I wouldn't say it's shocking, but it definitely caught me off guard this morning. And then when I read the 29-page memo, obviously that happened right before the hearing. So it was a bit of a domino effect between the Washington Post article last night, the one this morning, the 29-page memo. It's a lot to absorb.
Okay, there have been reports about two new instances of alleged sexual misconduct, one of which is under review or investigation by Mary Jo White. And then there's a second report. Do you have any faith that these investigations will lead to meaningful, truthful findings, and ultimately the kind of NFL discipline that you've been seeking, and the kind of justice that you've been seeking on behalf of the larger group? Do you have any faith in this process?
I have faith in Congress. I have my hope in Congress. I think they've done a very nice, thorough job. I think there's more to come with what they've gathered. I also am very curious about the attorney general, specifically DC and Maryland, that are doing investigations. I haven't heard anything about them, but I'm very curious what they might be going after. And then with Mary Jo White, I saw my attorney, Lisa Banks' statement in Deborah Katz today. She has mentioned that she's going to release those findings publicly, and I expect that that's what's going to happen. And you heard Roger Goodell state that today too. So I want to believe that they're going about this above board. And if not, I think this has too much heat to ever simmer down now. It's a matter of this, even though today was, it had ups and downs, I think it's a step forward in a big way. But yeah, I mean, we're going to have to wait and see.
Yeah. Are you afraid of any further repercussions from Dan Snyder, the commanders of the NFL? We just went through Johnny Depp versus Amber Heard. Anytime victims or alleged victims speak out, now we have the precedent of this sort of powerful people using the court process to silence others.
100%. And I mentioned this, the past 2 years. One of the very first things about putting my name on this was I'm scared for my safety, my reputation, smear campaigns, a billionaire, we're messing with billions of dollars with the NFL now. I've made mention that I would love for there to be protections for myself and others that have come forward in case down the road we're dealing with anything related to Dan Snyder and his cronies. And frankly, I think the NFL should provide those types of protections for folks like me, because it would be way too obvious to continue interfering right now with our lives. But we know him to be a vindictive person. And that's the part that I hope we don't have to deal with down the line, but it is scary. It's just like if I ever wanted to go back and work in professional sports, am I completely, never going to have that opportunity if I ever wanted it again? I think about all of that. There's consequences to coming forward. And unfortunately, there hasn't been a lot of upside here. So I'm hoping that the upside is congressional legislation. Hopefully Dan Snyder loses the team. I'd love to see a criminal investigation. And frankly, I think Roger Goodell needs to step down based on how he's handled this in other situations.
So I guess my last question, Megan, you know, I guess the breaking news, and if you were watching the hearing today, obviously Dan Snyder is going to be subpoenaed next week. So it lends itself to some additional, at least one additional hearing on this particular topic. You know, we've obviously talked a lot today. We've spoken a lot about a lot of different issues, a lot of new facts that have come up. What are your expectations as someone that's been very close to this investigation, personally involved? What are your expectations for the next hearing, assuming Dan Snyder does come and adhere to a subpoena?
I have no idea how to feel right now about the subpoena of Dan Snyder, whether or not he'll cooperate. And if he doesn't, what are the consequences? And my hope is that he cooperates, but you know, we've unfortunately seen precedent previously recently of folks not cooperating. I don't really have a good answer for that right now. I think I need to wrap my head around it a little bit more. I think he's shown that he thinks he's above the law right now. And he's doing everything he can to show the changes they've made in the organization and all of that. So I don't have faith in Dan Snyder. So I don't really know how to properly answer that one.
All right. Well, Megan, I can't thank you enough for spending your afternoon with us. It's been a busy day for you. You were watching the congressional hearing, which lasted for nearly 3 hours, and then jumping on with us on Conduct Detrimental to talk about your experiences and your expectations and provide some insight into your experience working with the commanders. I can't thank you enough. It was a pleasure having you on Conduct Detrimental, and we want to have you back if and when there's a next hearing. But I have a sneaking suspicion that next hearing might be delayed by a federal court lawsuit. And depending on how that plays out, we may or may not have a hearing, but if there is one, you'll be back 100%.
Well, thank you so much. And we appreciate the coverage. And I've learned a lot from your podcast.
Thank you, Megan.
Thank you. Bye.